This is the Hollywood Outsider. My name is Aaron Peterson, and welcome to a special edition of the Outsider Podcast. As today, I am interviewing our own Ho, Justin Macumber, as his second book, A Minor Magic, officially hit stores, 2 weeks ago? A week ago?
About 2 weeks ago.
Now, this is a much different take than his previous novel, Haywire. If you haven't read that, pick that one up too. So we're going to talk to Justin a little bit about the book itself, his writing, and where he's going to go from here. So how's it going, man?
Pretty good. We're waiting on got the new year coming up shortly, and I'm hoping 2013 is a better year than 2012 was. Though, in a lot of regards, 2012 was a pretty good year, but there were some dark times to that one too. But hopefully 2013 will be onward and upward, and everybody will, have great success.
I hope so. Hopefully we don't plummet into a fiscal cliff. This is your second book that you've had published, second full-length book that you've had published. Are you pretty excited to have this one out?
I am. Because it is so different from Haywire, I'm not sure how people are going to react to it. The whole topic of genre and reader expectation and author branding, and I say that with rabbit ears, is a difficult one. There are very few authors who can successfully navigate multiple genres. In fact, the only one that really leaps to mind right now, probably the most famous one, would be like a Stephen King. Most people know him for horror, and I think probably for most of the reading population, horror is what he's primarily known for, and maybe what they only know him for. But Stephen King has written fantasy, and he has written science fiction, and with his Dark Tower series, he actually wrote all of them together, with Western, the Western genre thrown into the mix with it. It was a really strange series of books that I absolutely adore, but it is such a genre mashup that it's hard to describe exactly where it would belong in what shelf group in your local bookstore. But there aren't a lot of authors, though, who do that, who try to write in multiple genres. And I hesitated to do that at first because I think readers want to know what to expect from the authors that they enjoy. If they're known for horror, or sci-fi, or young adult, whenever they see a new book coming out by this author, they're always hoping that it's a book in that genre, and they're going to read it and enjoy it, because not everybody who likes fantasy likes sci-fi, and vice versa. I know that surprises Brian. In fact, it really surprised him when we talked about movies. But when it comes to reading, especially, there are some really diehard genre fanatics. So when I wrote Haywire and it came out, it being my first book, it kind of, I think for some people probably set a trend or a tone that this guy, Justin Macumber, is a science fiction author. And I am, but I don't want to be tied to just sci-fi. That's not who I am. When I grew up consuming media of all types from all genres. I read as much sci-fi and fantasy as I did horror. I watched those things. I love stories that cover all those different genres. So when I sit down to write, I can't stick to one particular genre. So when I came out with the Haywire, I didn't want, or I'm really hoping that people don't see when A Minor Magic comes out. I don't want them to throw them for a loop and say, well, who is this guy to write? From the title of it alone, it's a fantasy. Who is he to write this book when the first one he wrote is so science fiction? So I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm hoping that people will, open themselves up to it, that maybe people who don't like science fiction yet maybe wanted to read something that I've written, maybe they'll give this a try, because it is very much unlike Haywire. It's a complete and total departure from that.
Well, first off, tell us a little bit, like a quick synopsis of what A Minor Magic is about.
A Minor Magic is about a young girl named Skylar. She's a 15-year-old girl. And when she was a very small child, this magical fire ravaged the planet and destroyed most of humanity and civilization. Most cities were destroyed, infrastructures ruined, people killed. And over the course of this one night, this fire pretty much undid all of what humanity had spent centuries and millennia putting together. And so Skylar and her mother were kind of roaming this blasted wasteland in a United States of America, trying to find a new civilization, find hope, and they stumbled across this small farm out in the in the woods of Tennessee, and so Skylar was adopted into this family, the Lamott's family. Her mother died soon after, so she lived probably about 10 years of her life or so with this family, being raised by them. And then one day, the book opens with her having just killed the family dog on this farm because the dog leapt at her, and when she raised her hands up to fend him off, this blue fire shot from her hands and consumed the dog and killed it. This adopted father sees this happen and recognizes that the fire that leapt from her hands looked so much like the fires that roamed and ravaged the planet 10 years prior. And so in her sees an echo of that destruction and sees that within her is this terrible power. And so he and his wife exile her from their farm because they can't have that. He sees her and that fire long ago as very much a religious thing. For him, it was, this was God's wrath on the planet. And now that she's got this fire, then that means she has this evil within her, and it's either I kill you now or you leave. And so Skylar leaves. She's 15, and now the rest of the book is her wandering through this blasted America, trying to survive, trying to discover who she is and what this power is. Where does it come from? What does it mean? And she comes across a group of people who know who she is and what the power is all about. And together, then they have to go on and see if there is some way to undo some of the damage that's been done.
What was the inspiration for Skylar? I'm curious.
My niece, Alina. I'm not a big young adult reader. I've read the Harry Potter books, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. But I really haven't read a lot of YA fiction. Most of my knowledge of it comes from the films that are made from it or the TV shows that are made for it. And over and over again, it seemed like a lot of the female characters, while strong, females, were quite often there, and so much of their story was wrapped up in finding a boyfriend or deciding between several boyfriends. They were defined by the men in their lives. Either the men were defining them for them, or they were defining themselves in the shadow of or in the light of these other guys. And that always kind of pissed me off. I mean, I don't understand why girls have to define themselves by the men in their lives. It doesn't make any sense. And I think it really it shortchanges women and girls to do that. And when I would think of my niece Alina, who just turned 13 this year, I knew she was a big fan of Twilight, and she was interested in other YA fiction, but I didn't want her to keep reading these books and feeling like, okay, this is what I have to do. I have to find a boy or someone, and then they are going to help define me. They're going to make me complete. I will now have to base my personality or my life or my whatever off this person, and I don't think she should have to do that. And so when I wrote Skylar and came up with that character, I wanted to create a girl who wasn't defined by any one particular boy or man or person. I didn't want her adventure to be about finding someone for her to be with. I wanted it to be about her and her finding out who she is, inside, not who she is in light of someone else. And I didn't want some guy to have to save her. I didn't want anything like that. And so I wrote this character who, in the book, does in the group of people she falls in with, there is a boy that she likes, but he never saves her. He never defines her. And their relationship doesn't become the central focus of the book. The central focus is her and her discovery, not her and him. And so that's who I really wrote it for, was my niece. And I hope someday she'll read it and she'll like it.
Oh, that's very sweet. You do have a soft side. Who knew? There's definitely some undercurrents about religious zealots in the book from what I've seen. And if anybody's listened to the show before, you know that Justin has some strong feelings in that area. Was that your goal? Well, actually, what was your goal or intention of that portion of the story?
Well, I wanted the book to take place in the South. I am a Southerner by birth, born in Texas, raised mostly in Texas, though a lot of people would really put Texas more in the West and not the South. Be that as it may, I've always felt like a Southerner, and I didn't want to write a book that took place in, the Pacific Northwest or up in, the North or anything like that. That's not where I'm from. I want this first book to be the South. But in the South, there is a lot of religious people and religious institutions, and the South is, kind of known for its evangelical leanings.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I couldn't write a book about something like the fire that burned the world without it having some kind of religious connotation. There's no way I could do that. The idea of that fire being either of God or of the devil would be, I think, the first thought of just about, not everybody, but a large portion of the South. And so when I started writing the book, I knew that I'm going to have to address this. I didn't want the book to be about God. And ultimately, the book isn't about God or the devil or anything like that. In fact, it's completely unrelated to those things. But I wanted to have some characters that would represent that kind of evangelical fervor. And so there is a character that we meet early on called the Preacher, who is quite a bad dude. But I didn't want somebody to pick up the book who was a Christian and read it and come away from it feeling like it was some kind of anti-religious or anti-Christian screen, because it's not. There are some characters in the book who are religious, and there's a little bit of discussion on it. But by the time you get through and you get to the end of it, hopefully people will realize that this wasn't about God or Christianity or any one religion. That was just kind of a factor early on. I know I'm not, a really religious person. I don't have a lot of faith in that regard, but I don't want to demonize people who are of that ilk. So I didn't want to kind of overdo it in this book. It's mentioned there's a character early on that's kind of represents that. But that's also why when I started the book off with the Lamotts on this farm, I had initially thought, well, maybe he will try and kill her, because maybe he does really believe the line of, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, and he sees her something as a witch. But I thought, there's no way that a person could spend 10 years kind of raising a child, and then because of one event, suddenly you murder them. So I intentionally made it so that he would, even though exile seems kind of rough, it's a lot less rough than, killing this person or doing something heinous.
Well, and actually, I personally know people that have been exiled because of religious differences. So it comes back to truth. Now, this genre, like you talked about a little bit earlier, is a little different from Haywire, because Haywire is very science fiction-y. Which genre feels more natural to you?
Really, truthfully speaking, horror does. Writing a Minor Magic has been really interesting because it is a fantasy. There are all sorts of subtle genre distinctions that some people really hold close. There's, within science fiction and fantasy and horror, there is a subgenre called urban fantasy, which basically covers your Twilights. Supernatural, the TV show, would be considered an urban fantasy. What urban fantasy is it's a story that takes place kind of in a modern setting, in a world, in the world we live in, but it has fantastical elements, whether it's vampires or fairies or wizards. The Dresden Files is an urban fantasy. But then you can get into these finer distinctions of paranormal fantasy, paranormal romance. And then within YA, there's teen paranormal, teen romance, all sorts of little things that can go through it. With A Minor Magic, it's because the protagonist is a 15-year-old girl. I think that it could fit within the YA umbrella. It could exist under that, because I think anybody of about 13 and older reading it would find some things that in common and be able to root for Skylar in her plight. So YA is definitely a genre it could be in, but it could also exist within paranormal fantasy. It could exist within urban fantasy, because it has elements to it that go in all of it. But there's a chapter about halfway through the book that takes place, well, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a very horrific chapter. And when I wrote it with the intention of putting in something incredibly dark and hopefully a little disturbing. And when I wrote it and finished it, that really kind of stoked my fire to want to write a horror novel, a full-length horror novel. And so when I finished the first draft the first draft of A Minor Magic, the very next thing I wrote was a horror novel called Stillwater. And the fun I had writing that, it was the most fun writing experience that I've had in a long time, because it took place in our world as it exists now. So I didn't have to make up any kind of fantasy creatures or fantasy locations. I didn't have to explain how everything was covered in ash and dust and cloudy skies and blah, blah. It was our world. And when you write a story that takes place in our world, it has a plus and a minus. The plus, the world I'm talking about, because you live in it every day. So it takes a lot of the need for me to describe things. It takes that weight off my shoulders, because I can just say, he walked into a house, and in your mind, you can imagine what that house is going to look like. I don't have to go into great depths. On the downside, though, because we all live in this world, if I fuck something up or I get something wrong, you're going to know it pretty quick. So that familiarity is great, but it can kind of turn on you. With Stillwater, I had a lot of fun, and I really can't wait to get back to that story and get back to editing it. But lately, everything that I've been reading has been horror. The movies that I've been wanting to watch have been horror. And so I think horror is probably my go-to genre now. But again, that genre will also just not define me. There are still science fiction stories that I want to write, and A Minor Magic is just the first in what I'm hoping to be a trilogy of books. So this YA urban fantasy kind of genre is something that I will continue to write in as well.
Now, do you see this one as the start of a series?
Well, I don't want to say a series. I just want to say a trilogy. It's going to have a definitive end. I have nothing against open-ended series. I think they're fine, and I've read some. But I like finality. I like closure, and I like an arc to a story. Things that are left open can sometimes really start to go bad, and you can tell that the people behind it are, just kind of going through the motions, and I don't want to do that. So with A Minor Magic, when I wrote the first book, I wrote it as a one-off with the hope that if a publisher got it and liked it, then I would write another, because within it I put a couple of hooks that I could hang a sequel on. I didn't surround them in neon and put arrows pointing at them saying, here's what's coming up next, because I didn't want to, if a publisher didn't want to publish a sequel or wasn't interested in more, I didn't want to leave a lot of people left, well, like, oh, this thing has no ending. It has definitive ending. But there are things within it and hooks near the end that the sequel could have been written on. And so when I wrote the sequel, I hung it directly on those hooks. And I thoroughly enjoyed writing the first draft of the sequel to A Minor Magic. It's called A Broken Magic. And it was a lot of fun to get back to that world and expand it. But a trilogy is where I see it. The third book will definitely be where Skylar's story and probably that world's story comes to a conclusion, and then I, move on to other things.
Well, now you have 2 books published, and both are available: Amazon, Kindle, iBooks, wherever you want to go. As an author, what do you use as your measure of success? Do you use sales or do you use feedback from readers?
I would like to use sales, but right now I can't.
You're still getting your footing in the door and everything else.
Well, the publishing industry has changed and continues to change so much, and really almost on a daily basis. When I started doing my other podcast 6 years ago, 5.5, the world of publishing was a lot different. I mean, whenever I would talk with authors about self-publishing or small presses, there was a lot of head shaking and a lot of, no, I don't want to do that. It was really looked down on. But since then, the world of self-publishing has really opened up, and a lot of people, well, I can't say a lot, a number of people have found great success with self-publishing, and that self-publishing leading to larger press publishing. But even those who don't find huge success are finding success. I mean, one of the guys that I host a podcast with, Terry, he writes erotica, and he writes these erotic short stories, and he sells them on Amazon, and he's now routinely making, $3,000 a month.
Wow.
So those short stories, yeah, it's impressive, the amount of money and success that he's finding with that. And so he's not going to quit his day job yet, but he's definitely making quite a bit of money writing these stories. To do this, he didn't need a publisher. He didn't need agents. He didn't need anything. All he needed was himself, his gumption, and Amazon, and some other distribution channels as well, but mostly Amazon to make that money. And so writers can now chart their own destiny if we want to get grandiose with it. But there are still a lot of writers out there that's not enough. They want the affirmation that that they feel like they can only get through a publisher, whether that publisher is a smaller press or that publisher is Bantam or Penguin in New York. And I know some authors who they will not publish anything unless it comes through a big New York publishing house. That is their goal. That's what they want. And they will settle for nothing else. And they won't consider themselves successful until they get that big New York deal. I kind of feel bad for them because those big New York deals are getting harder and harder to come by. Mm-hmm. And if they think those are going to lead to fame and fortune, they are sadly mistaken. I know quite a few authors published through the big publishing houses. They're still living in shitty little apartments. Some of them still have day jobs because they're not getting paid that much. If you want to get that kind of money, then you have to start getting movie deals, movie options, TV options, maybe a video game option. Just the publishing of that one book, unless you hit some kind of vein that resonates through masses of people, like 50 Shades of Grey seem to, or the Harry Potter books, or hell, Twilight. Unless you can somehow really just hit that golden nail, you're not going to find huge money. So I don't want to find my success through who's publishing me, whether it's big or small. I want to define it as that I am able to earn a living. Mm-hmm. My wife right now is the one who earns the living, and I try and build this career. I'm hoping that someday maybe she can quit, and then I can support the both of us while she pursues her dreams, like she's allowing me to do right now. So I'll be successful when I can sustain the both of us through the money I earn as a writer. When that day comes, I don't know. Maybe soon, maybe never. But I'm hopeful. I mean, A Minor Magic is a book that I could easily see as a film. I mean, when I write, I'm always writing based on a movie that's playing inside my brain. And I'm just kind of notating down all the things that I see and hear. I would love to see it made into a film, and I think it would be an incredibly fun sort of movie. It's got everything in it that I think would make a movie interesting. But will someone in Hollywood find out about it? I don't know. I don't quite know who to approach to do that, because I don't know. I really don't know any screenwriters. And just getting your material out there and on someone's desk and not thrown into a trash bin is an arduous task in and of itself. So I don't know. I'm a published author. I am further along than a lot of people are, and further along than I myself was just a few years ago. And I'm glad for that. I don't feel successful as much as I would like, but maybe someday. I don't want to, though. I don't want anybody to take that as me looking down on my own success, because I don't. I am incredibly thankful for the success that I have found, and I have a lot more confidence in my ability as a writer and my ability to be published now that I have been published, because I've made friends and contacts. In fact, the Griffinwood Press, the press that printed Haywire, the founder of that, he actually, now I'm somewhat of an associate editor with them. I'm helping going through Slush Pile and reading some things, and I'll be helping with some other things. So I don't have any doubt that the books that I write from here on out won't find a press either through Griffinwood or someone else. So I'm not ever going to look down on my own success or the things that I've achieved. I just wish more people would read what I write, and that I could earn a living off of it, such that even if my wife couldn't retire, that I felt like I was at least pulling my own weight. You know how it is as a guy, right?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think I do.
You're kind of a dude, so
Barely.
I don't need to be the breadwinner. I just want to make some bread.
At least you're honest about it. But you are part of two successful podcasts on the interwebs, ours as well as Dead Robot Society, which cover completely different topics. So I'm curious, how has that helped or hindered your career as an author? From both avenues, both podcasts.
Well, I mean, I never would have met David Wood from Griffinwood Press were it not for my podcast. I mean, I wouldn't have met any of the writers or publishers were it not for that podcast. And even though the agent that I had eventually turned into a nightmare, that itself led to me knowing some other people, which led me to Crescent Moon Press, who are the people that published A Minor Magic. But none of that would have happened had I not been doing, the Dead Robot Society, meeting editors, meeting authors, meeting agents and publishers. And so the career I have today is in direct response to doing that podcast. And I mean, to be completely honest, that's why I started it. Time after time, I would hear writers talk about, if you want to find an agent, find a publisher, it's not always just enough to send in submissions to these people. You need to get out there and put a face to your name, meet these people at conventions, shake their hand, exchange business cards. The more contacts you can make, the better your chances are of finding success. And so when I started the podcast, a part of it was entirely self-serving. I want to get to know these people. I want to meet them. I want them to know my name, and I want to know their name, as well as their email address and where I can submit things to. And I don't make any bones about that. Your artistic career, you get out of it what you put into it. And if you're just going to sit back and send your work out into the world and hope that success comes and finds you and knocks on your door, the odds of you actually having that happen are pretty well slim to none.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put effort into not just the writing of your book, but in finding those agents, finding those publishers and editors. And that's what I did. And luckily I was able to do it from the comfort of my own office, sitting in my chair, interviewing them. So I've got a lot of success through that. Your podcast, though, has enabled me to meet a lot of people that I never would have met through my own podcast. And I know sell quite a number of books that I never would have sold were it not for me being on it. And I actually think that the listeners we have on the Hollywood Outsiders have been more receptive, and they've bought more copies of the books than I think people who listen to my podcast, the Dead Robot Society, have bought. So it's, I found network connections and success through my podcast, but I found more readers and friends through your podcast. So they both kind of have brought me to two different successes.
Do you think that's because your podcast, it's a lot of authors themselves?
I think so. I as a struggling author, I know why people would listen to the Dead Robot Society, and I recognize that a lot of them are so busy with their own writing and their own books and those sorts of things and whatnot, that buying yet another person's book just to read it may not be at the top of their list. Their books, their life is about writing their own stories, and so I get that. Though I like buying books of the people that I like and that I'm friends with, so that in the eventual hope of meeting them and having them sign it, I'm a complete whore for autographed books. I love autographed books, whether I get them autographed in person or I send them to them to get autographed. I love having authors sign books. So I do buy a lot of books. I buy a lot of books from people that I've interviewed, and I adore getting them signed. But a lot of our listeners maybe don't have the money or just don't have the time to support everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. But luckily, the listeners on this show are real consumers of story and narrative. They love. I mean, that's the whole reason you watch TV and movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to sit back and be blissfully ignorant of what's going on. You want to enjoy a really good story. Fortunately, a lot of our listeners on this show also like to read them as well as watch them on a big or small screen.
Well, okay, now you've tackled a couple of different genres. What's up next? And more importantly, when is there going to be like a sexy male hero named Aaron? Because I keep waiting for that, and it hasn't happened yet.
Well, this year is really going to be a busy year because I've got, the next thing that I'm going to write is a short story for an anthology that I was asked to be a part of. And what's really interesting about this anthology is that the stories are all going to be, it's kind of a mashup of samurai and the Old West, where basically the stories are going to be about these gunslingers, but that has a real Bushido edge to it. Where they're going to be written, and these characters are going to be very samurai-like in their look. The way the samurai would look at their sword, in almost kind of a religious way. It's kind of the way they see their guns. And so the anthology is called The Way of the Gun, and it's a Bushido Western series. And so the story I'm going to write for it is going to be called The Dragon and the Sparrow, and it's about a gunslinger and vampires, actually. I couldn't write a story like this and not have some kind of genre element to it, but some spec fic genre element to it. And so I really like the idea of a gunslinger having to fight some vampires, and not your Dracula or Twilighty vampires, but a lot more bestial kind of monstrous vampires. But the title refers to his weapons, which is a shotgun, which is the dragon, and his sword, which is called the sparrow. And so that's what I'm going to write first. And then after that, there was another anthology that I was asked to write a short story for. But this anthology is about those old Universal movie monsters. And so I took The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and what he wanted us to do was to take these characters, but put a completely new spin on them. Don't just write another Dracula story, write a different kind of Dracula story. And he really left it wide open as to what we wanted to do with it. So I think I'm going to go a sci-fi route with Creature from the Black Lagoon and make him perhaps more of an alien or something. Well, we'll see. I haven't quite finished fleshing out that story. But once those two are done and sent off, I'm going to get back to writing the second draft of Stillwater, which is that horror novel. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to send it off to my beta readers to read and go through and find any plot holes or inconsistencies or weak parts that I can fix. And while they're reading that, I'm going to do the second draft of A Broken Magic. Hopefully by the time they send me back their edits for Stillwater, I can then send out A Broken Magic to have them go over that. And kind of alternate back and forth between those two novels until they're at a point where I want to send them off to different publishers to see if they're interested in publishing them. And while they're out, there are several more projects. There's a sci-fi serial fiction thing that I'm thinking about doing, and I'm actually thinking about writing a screenplay with my brother.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a found footage type movie, a horror movie. And I don't know if I ever talked with you about it or talked about it on the show, but last year I was on a cruise, and while we were on it, I was reading a book about a haunted house, and I enjoyed reading it so much that I thought I would really like to write a haunted house story. I think that would be really fun and interesting, but what can I really bring to it that hadn't been brought to it before? And just for some reason, around that same time, I was thinking about, those shows you see on the HGTV channel about, flipping houses or people that buy a house, refurbish it, and then sell it. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if there was one of these types of shows that the crew went to this old dilapidated house to refurbish it and flip it, but that house was also haunted. And so while they're filming the work going on in this house, strange shit really starts to go down, and it becomes a kind of a found footage. It's, Paranormal Activity meets, flip this house kind of a thing, but really evil, really demonic.
That sounds fun. And I did read the prologue to Stillwater, and that's a really intriguing premise. So I look forward to seeing the finished product of that. And still no word from you on the sexy male hero named Me. Just saying. But...
Well, I put you in the horror movie. I mean, I'd have to kill you, but...
To make sure I go out painfully. That's all I ask. Any conventions or sightings coming up, or where can people find Justin Macumber sightings and readings and keep updated on your whereabouts?
As far as conventions go, I really don't know. I want to go to Dragon Con really bad, but I was stupid and I didn't secure a room ahead of time that would have been at a price point that... The thing about Dragon Con is it takes place across about 5 or 6 hotels. Each of those hotels sections off a certain number of hotel rooms for the convention goers at a reduced rate. But there's a limited number, and if you don't get in early enough, you're screwed. You're going to have to pay, if you want to stay in those hotels, you're going to have to pay a higher rate. And so if I want to go to that, I'm either going to have to pay a lot of money, or I'm going to have to stay at a hotel further away and then just drive to the convention and park every day, which is, it's about 3 days. So it's not terrible, but it's not as convenient as waking up, taking a shower, and then, elevator downstairs and boom, there you are. So I'm still not sure about Dragon Con. I would like to do Balticon, which is in Baltimore the last, it's in June, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get to go to that either. There are some local conventions here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that I'm going to try to go to, most likely just as a fan goer and not as somebody speaking on panels. But I really wanted this year to be a convention year, and it's not looking like it's going to do that, in some part because of vacations. My wife and I are going to be taking a vacation in July. That's going to be rather expensive, and so the money and time is kind of going to get eaten away with that. I don't know if there's going to be much left over to go to faraway conventions, but we'll see. But if they're interested in what I'm writing, then go to my website. Just it's plain old justinmacumber.com, Macumber. I don't update it all that often, and some people like that, some people hate it. But if you want to know what I'm writing, most of my short stories are on that website. You can read it for free, or there's links to where you can buy them for your Kindle. There are pages about the books on there as well, and where you can buy them. With Haywire, what I also did, and I haven't seen too many other authors do it, is I created a page for Haywire that talks a lot about what inspired it, and also I included sections from earlier drafts of the book that are quite different than what was eventually published. So if anybody's read the book and is interested in seeing kind of some of the ugly early versions of it, then they're on there. There are some chapters that were completely thrown away and rewritten, so you can kind of see where it started at. I think your audience is probably savvy enough to know that the movies they watch and the TV shows they watch are the pretty end result of a very ugly, lengthy process. And books are the same way. You pick a book up, you open it, you read it, it's wonderful, and probably in part of your brain you think, wow, this thing came out perfect. I love it. Well, it didn't come out perfect. What you're reading is a Frankenstein monster sutured together of multiple drafts, editors taking things out, the writer rewriting huge entire segments of it. It can be a pretty grisly process of making something that at the end hopefully looks seamless. And so with Haywire, I wanted to show people, look, this is how ugly things can be in those early drafts. Come take a look. So if they're interested in reading stuff like that, it's on my website. But they can meet me there, or if they want to hear me, see me post more often, I do a lot of Facebooking, usually random thoughts and things like that. You can go to facebook.com/Justin Macumber, or if you just want to read my writer stuff, then Justin R. Macumber.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us for a special edition of The Hoe. Like we said, Justin's novel, A Minor Magic, is just at Amazon and other sites, so find it, use your gift cards, pick up a copy. Where exactly is it available?
I know right now it's available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. I don't know if it's available on iBooks yet, or the iBook store, but I do know it's available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
And Haywire's available where?
Oh, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Sony, Amazon, Smashwords, iBook store, in print and in ebook format. It's also a audiobook available on Amazon, available through iTunes and through audible.com. I will be doing an audiobook version of A Minor Magic. The woman, Veronica, that narrated Haywire will also be narrating this book. I love working with her. I've known her for several years. She has an amazing voice. It's sexy, very smooth, and she's also capable of a lot of accents and vocal types. So I look forward to seeing what she does with some of these more southern characters as opposed to the things that she had to do in Haywire with some French accents and English accents and things like that. But there will be an audiobook version of that, hopefully around March or so, but we'll see.
Well, thanks, Justin, for being here. I appreciate it. I mean, obviously you're on the show every week, but it's a little different when you're talking about yourself for 45 minutes. I know. How do you like doing the interview part of it? Because obviously that's part of marketing.
I like doing it. I think I mentioned this last time you and I talked. Mm-hmm. about Haywire. I kind of hate doing it here because I don't want our listeners to ever feel like that this show is just a vehicle for us to move on to something else. I love doing this show, and of the podcasts that I do, this one is it really is my favorite one. Not just because I have to do no editing, and most of the work that I do is what you hear. But I love movies and I love good television, and so being able to talk about those with people who are as passionate about it as I am is a blast. And I love that we can disagree, even though you're quite often wrong. Enjoy, debating the merits of certain movies and TV shows. It's a lot of fun, and I love that the listeners that we have here are so interactive. It's rare for me to hear from the listeners of the Dead Robot Society. On Facebook, they do come through a bit, but I never get emails. I very rarely get tweets. So the listeners on this show are a lot more interactive, and it's fun getting to hear them and their opinions. So I love doing it. I don't want them to think, though, that I'm only doing this show because I want to reach some broader audience in some self-serving way. I love doing the show, and if I never wrote another book, I would still keep doing the show. It is a hell of a lot of fun, and most of it is due in part to your hard work, Aaron. Not to, blow you or anything on your own podcast, but you put a lot of work into this show, and even though you may not think so, I appreciate it a great deal, and I respect all the work you put into it, and thank you for it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm perfectly okay with being blown. And we're gonna have our whole awards on the next episode, so everybody should chime in for that, because you're gonna hear Justin and mine, as well as Brian and Scott's thoughts on what was the best and worst of 2012, and that should be interesting because I'm kind of curious what everybody's gonna pick for their favorite movies. So, and if you guys want to buy Justin's book, make sure to go out, spend your money, pick it up, support a up and coming author. That would be great. It's actually good work. I've read a little bit of it. I haven't read a lot, but I read a lot of Haywire, and Haywire was really good. So pick it up if you can. Come back for a brand new episode of Hollywood Outsider later in the week, and remember, the next time you head to the theater, buy popcorn.